How does a canceled, ridiculed, half-forgotten television show become the most influential science fiction franchise in human history? What was really happening behind those cardboard sets and foam rubber aliens that made people feel something so deep they never recovered from it? And what happened to the strange, brilliant, combustible collection of humans who made it? To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to Hollywood in 1964, to a writer who had already failed once and who was about to make the strangest bet of his life. Gene Roddenberry was not a visionary when he first pitched Star Trek. He was a desperate man. Born in El Paso, Texas on August 19, 1921, Roddenberry had survived World War II, a commercial airline crash he walked away from, and a television career that was grinding slowly toward irrelevance. By 1964, he was 43 years old, moderately successful, largely unremarkable, and quietly terrified that he had already peaked. His pitch document for Star Trek described the show as "wagon train to the stars," a comparison so deliberately commercial it almost disguises how radical the actual idea was. Because hidden inside that safe Western metaphor was something the television industry had never attempted. A future where a black woman sat on the bridge as an officer, where a Russian and an Asian served without hierarchy or suspicion, where a half-alien could be the most respected man on the ship. In 1964, with the Civil Rights Act still ink-fresh on paper and Vietnam beginning to devour American sons, this was not entertainment. This was provocation dressed in a velour uniform. NBC rejected the first pilot. This is perhaps the single most important weird fact in Star Trek's entire history, because the reason they rejected it is almost incomprehensible now. The network said the pilot, titled The Cage, was too sophisticated for a general audience. They also objected to two specific casting choices: the presence of a woman, number one, in a senior command position, played by Majel Barrett, and the presence of a character with satanic features, the Vulcan Mr. Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy. NBC wanted both removed. Roddenberry fought, compromised, and made history by accident. He kept Spock and removed number one, though Barrett quietly returned as Nurse Chapel. NBC then did something virtually unprecedented in television history. They ordered a second pilot, giving Roddenberry a second chance that almost no failed show ever receives. He used it to introduce James Tiberius Kirk, played by a then relatively unknown Canadian actor named William Shatner, whose theatrical intensity and barely controlled energy gave the show a center it had lacked. The Enterprise Bridge was built on Stage 9 at Desilu Studios for a budget of approximately $500,000 per episode, which sounds substantial until you understand that competing shows at the time were spending double that. The crew constructed alien planets from rented furniture, painted foam rocks, and backgrounds that, under scrutiny, look exactly like what they are. And yet somehow, inside those cheaply constructed walls, something electrically real kept happening. Here is the first truly strange fact most people have never examined. The communicators used by Kirk and the crew, those small flip-open devices, directly inspired the design of the Motorola StarTAC flip phone decades later. Martin Cooper, the engineer who led the team that created the first handheld mobile phone in 1973, stated publicly that watching Kirk flip open his communicator as a young man planted the idea in him. The future was not predicting technology. The future was designing it. Fact 2. Uhura's full name is Nyota Uhura, but that first name was never spoken once in the original series. It existed only in tie-in novels and was not made officially canonical until the 2009 J.J. Abrams film. Nichelle Nichols, who played her with a quiet, unshakable dignity, nearly quit after the first season. She had been offered a Broadway role and was seriously prepared to take it. The person who convinced her to stay was not a producer, not a network executive, and not Gene Roddenberry. It was Martin Luther King Jr. Nichols met him at a civil rights fundraiser, and when she mentioned she was considering leaving Star Trek, King stopped the conversation entirely. He told her she could not leave. He told her she was not just playing a character, she was showing Black America, and particularly young black girls, what the future could look like. She was the proof on a major network every week that they belonged there. Nichols returned to work on Monday, and the world, quite literally, changed for it. Mae Jemison, the first black woman to travel to space aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour in 1992, cited Uhura as her direct inspiration. When Jemison finally appeared in a 1993 episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, the circle completed itself in a way that no screenwriter could have scripted convincingly. Art had reached into reality, pulled a human being into space, and then welcomed her home. This was what Star Trek was doing while NBC executives worried about ratings. It was committing quiet revolutions in plain sight. The Enterprise herself was almost unrecognizable in early designs. The original concept sketches show a ship that looked more like a submarine with nacelles awkwardly bolted on. Matt Jeffries, the production designer, went through dozens of iterations before arriving at the iconic saucer and nacelle configuration. He later admitted that the final design came to him at 3 a.m. after weeks of frustration. He sketched it on a napkin at a diner and brought it to Roddenberry the next day. That napkin sketch became the most recognizable spaceship in human culture. Fact 4. The transporter was not invented because Roddenberry thought it was cool science fiction. It was invented because the show could not afford to film shuttlecraft landing on planets every episode. The budget simply did not exist. So the writers created a device that dissolved people into energy and reassembled them elsewhere, saving tens of thousands of dollars per season in special effects costs. Necessity mothered one of science fiction's most enduring concepts. Fact 5. Spock's nerve pinch, that iconic hand-to-neck gesture that renders opponents unconscious, was invented by Leonard Nimoy during the filming of The Enemy Within. The script called for Spock to knock someone out with the butt of a phaser. Nimoy thought it looked too violent, too human, too crude for a character defined by intellect and control. He suggested the nerve pinch instead. The director agreed. One improvisation became canonical Vulcan physiology. Fact 6. The famous Vulcan salute, the raised hand with separated fingers, came from Nimoy's childhood. He grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community in Boston, and as a boy, he witnessed a blessing ceremony where the Kohanim, the Jewish priests, made a similar gesture. The shape of the hands represented the Hebrew letter Shin, symbolizing one of the names of God. Nimoy brought that sacred gesture into Star Trek, and millions of people around the world now raise their hands in a greeting that contains, unknowingly, a fragment of ancient liturgy. Fact 7. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy were not friends during the original series. The tension between them was quiet, professional, and persistent. Shatner felt Nimoy was receiving too much attention. Nimoy felt Shatner was scenery-chewing and difficult. They worked together brilliantly on screen and barely spoke off it. It was not until decades later, after conventions, films, and the shared weight of having carried something larger than both of them, that they reconciled. Nimoy's death in 2015 devastated Shatner in ways he admitted publicly he had not expected. Fact 8. The original series was almost entirely written by science fiction authors moonlighting in television. Harlan Ellison, Theodore Sturgeon, Richard Matheson, writers who had spent years in the pulp magazines, suddenly had access to a national audience. Ellison's episode, The City on the Edge of Forever, is widely considered the best Star Trek episode ever made, and Ellison spent the rest of his life complaining bitterly about how Roddenberry rewrote it. He published the original script in book form just to prove his point. Fact 9. The show was canceled after 2 seasons. NBC announced the decision in early 1968, and it seemed final. Then something unprecedented happened. Fans organized. They wrote letters, thousands of them, in an era when writing a letter required paper, a stamp, and genuine effort. They showed up at NBC headquarters. They refused to let it die quietly. NBC, startled and unsure how to respond to organized fandom, renewed the show for a 3rd season. It was the first time in television history that viewer outcry reversed a cancellation. But the 3rd season was a catastrophe. NBC moved Star Trek to the Friday night death slot at 10 p.m., a time when its core audience of young people were out of their homes. The budget was slashed. Roddenberry, exhausted and bitter, stepped back from day-to-day production. The episodes became cheaper, stranger, more desperate. And after 79 episodes on June 3, 1969, Star Trek aired its final original episode and vanished from network television. For most shows, that would have been the end. But Star Trek refused to stay dead. In 1970, something almost mystical began happening in television markets across America. Local stations, desperate for cheap content to fill afternoon and late-night slots, began purchasing syndication rights to Star Trek. And suddenly, the show that had barely survived on network television found its true audience: college students, children coming home from school, insomniacs, people who had missed it the first time or had never heard of it at all. The ratings in syndication dwarfed anything the show had achieved during its original run. Star Trek was not canceled. It was just early. Fact 10. The animated series that followed, which aired from 1973 to 1974, is often dismissed as a footnote. But it was the first time Star Trek returned to production after cancellation, and it allowed the writers to do things impossible with a live-action budget. Entire episodes took place in zero gravity. Alien crew members joined the Enterprise. The universe expanded in ways the original show could never afford. And it won an Emmy, something the original series never accomplished. Fact 11. The first Star Trek convention happened in January 1972 in New York City. The organizers expected maybe a few hundred people. Over 3,000 showed up. They had to turn people away at the door. Gene Roddenberry attended and was genuinely shocked. He had thought the show was over, a noble failure, a good try. Instead, he walked into a room full of people dressed as his characters, people who had memorized his dialogue, people who believed in the future he had imagined. He cried during his speech. The convention became an annual event, and from that single gathering, modern fandom as we know it was born. Fact 12. NASA named its first space shuttle Enterprise because of a letter-writing campaign by Star Trek fans. The original name was supposed to be Constitution, but fans wrote to President Gerald Ford and NASA in such overwhelming numbers that the agency relented. On September 17, 1976, the Space Shuttle Enterprise was rolled out in Palmdale, California, and standing on the platform watching it were Gene Roddenberry, most of the original cast, and thousands of fans. A television show had named a spacecraft. The line between fiction and reality had dissolved. Fact 13. Star Trek. The motion picture, which finally brought the crew back in 1979, had one of the most troubled productions in Hollywood history. The budget ballooned to $46 million, astronomical for the time. The special effects were so behind schedule that the film was still being edited days before the premiere. Robert Wise, the director, never got to release a version he was satisfied with until the 2001 Director's Edition on DVD. And yet the film earned $139 million worldwide. The hunger for Star Trek was so deep that even a flawed, slow, over-budget film could not kill it. Fact 14. Leonard Nimoy hated being Spock for years after the original series ended. He wrote a book in 1975 titled I Am Not Spock, trying desperately to separate himself from the character that had defined and trapped him. He turned down the first offers to return for the films. He wanted to be seen as a serious actor, a director, a human being distinct from the emotionless Vulcan. But time softened him. By 1995, he published another book, this one titled I Am Spock, A Reconciliation and Acceptance. He admitted that Spock had given him everything, and that running from that was running from himself. Fact 15. The Klingons in the original series looked nothing like the Klingons in later Star Trek productions. In the 1960s, they were essentially humans with dark skin and facial hair because the budget allowed nothing more elaborate. When Star Trek the Motion Picture introduced the ridged forehead Klingons, fans were confused. The discrepancy was never explained on screen until a 2005 episode of Star Trek. Enterprise finally addressed it, revealing a genetic virus that altered Klingon appearance. A makeup budget limitation became decades of canon storytelling. Fact 16. The Tribbles, those small furry creatures from the episode The Trouble with Tribbles, were made from synthetic fur glued onto beanbags. They cost about $3.50 each to produce. That episode, written by David Gerrold when he was just 23 years old, became one of the most beloved in the entire franchise. Gerrold pitched it as a spec script, never expecting it to be produced. It aired on December 29, 1967, and tribbles became so iconic that they appear in later series as callbacks, Easter eggs, and affectionate references. Fact 17. Nichelle Nichols, after Star Trek ended, worked directly with NASA to recruit minority and female astronauts. She produced videos, gave speeches, and personally encouraged thousands of applicants. Among those she recruited were Guion Bluford, the first African-American in space, Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, and Judith Resnick and Ronald McNair, both of whom died aboard the Challenger in 1986. Uhura did not just inspire from a screen. She opened the door and held it. Fact 18. The famous kiss between Kirk and Uhura in the episode Plato's Stepchildren, often cited as the first interracial kiss on American television, was not actually the first. That distinction belongs to an earlier show. But what made the Star Trek kiss significant was the context. It was not played for shock value or moral debate. It was simply two officers trapped by aliens, forced into an act that the show treated as unremarkable. The future it depicted was one where such a kiss required no justification. That was the revolution, quiet and absolute. Fact 19. William Shatner sold his kidney stone in 2006 for $25,000 and donated the money to Habitat for Humanity. This is possibly the strangest piece of Star Trek-adjacent trivia that exists, and yet it is completely, bewilderingly true. The buyer was an online casino. Shatner himself said, "This takes organ donors to a new height, to a new low maybe. How much is a piece of me worth?" The answer, apparently, was enough to build a house. Fact 20. The original series model of the Enterprise, the one used in filming, was lost for years. It disappeared after the show ended, presumed destroyed or discarded. In the 1990s, it was found in someone's personal collection, damaged and dusty. The Smithsonian Institution acquired it, restored it painstakingly, and now it hangs in the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. Millions of people walk beneath it every year. A television prop became a historical artifact, suspended in a museum dedicated to humanity's actual journey to the stars. Today, Star Trek exists as 11 television series, 13 films, hundreds of novels, and a cultural footprint so vast it is almost impossible to quantify. It has been translated into dozens of languages. It has been analyzed in university courses on philosophy, politics, ethics, and engineering. The United Federation of Planets, a fictional government, has been cited in real political discourse as an aspirational model. And yet, the most extraordinary thing about Star Trek is not what it became. It is what it almost was not. A rejected pilot, a canceled show, a forgotten experiment that survived because people refused to let it die. Gene Roddenberry died on October 24, 1991, at the age of 70. His ashes were launched into space aboard a Celestis spacecraft in 1997. He never saw the full scope of what he had created, the way his vision metastasized into something beyond television, beyond entertainment, into a shared mythology that gave millions of people a language for hope. From the desperate pitch of a middle-aged writer to the most enduring science fiction universe ever created, Star Trek's legacy is proof that the future does not arrive on its own. It must be imagined first, fought for second, and believed in even when the world insists it is impossible. What weird fact surprised you the most? What part of Star Trek's hidden history do you carry with you now? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of the things that almost never happened but changed everything because someone refused to give up. Because in the end, as Captain Kirk taught us across 79 episodes and a lifetime of reruns, the impossible is just another word for what we have not done yet.